How Minnesota's budget works. Most political debates in Minnesota are over how much money the state collects in taxes and how much the state spends on programs. Revenue and appropriations are covered in the state's budget. Minnesota's budget process is different from that of the federal government. The federal government budgets every year. Well, at least they're supposed to. Minnesota sets a budget every 2 years, or biennium. The federal budget is in trillions of dollars. Minnesota's budget is in billions. The federal budget allows for spending when the money has run out, deficit spending. Minnesota's constitution prohibits the state from spending into a deficit. The state can only spend what it collects in revenue. Economists predict how much money will be raised in taxes over the next biennium, and then the governor and the legislature negotiate on how to spend that predicted money. This negotiation varies from contentious to messy. The most recent enacted budget was for the 2016-17 biennium, which started July 2015. Minnesota's taxes will raise about $48 billion in that 2 years. $1 billion is such a high figure that it's hard to imagine how much that truly is. Luckily for us, a building was just built in Minnesota that costs just about exactly $1 billion, the new Vikings Stadium. From here on out, we'll talk about the budget in terms of how many stadiums you could buy. Just remember, one stadium equals $1 billion. The state of Minnesota spends money out of many funds, but the governor and legislature negotiate how the biggest fund is spent, the general fund. The general fund is expected to raise a little more than 42 stadiums in revenue over 2 years. 22 stadiums of that is from the state's individual income tax. 11 stadiums come from the state's sales tax. The rest comes from other taxes and revenue sources. Remember, Minnesota is controlled by law to only spend as much as it collects. The general fund is expected to collect slightly more than 42 stadiums of revenue, but is only scheduled to spend slightly less than 42 stadiums of money. The state's general fund spends money on many things, but it's mostly spent on two categories: K-12 education and health and human services. The general fund's K-12 education allotment would pay for 17 and a quarter stadiums over 2 years. The general fund's health and human services allotment would pay for 12 and a half stadiums. The general fund will spend more than 3 stadiums on property tax aid and credits, 3 stadiums on higher education, 2 stadiums on public safety, more than 1 stadium on debt service, 1 stadium on state government and veterans, 2/5 of a stadium on economic development, 1/3 of a stadium on environment and agriculture, and 1/4 of a stadium on transportation. 42 stadiums of general fund money spent in 2 years. But the state spends way more than that. When you add in the rest of the money the state collects in revenue, plus the money the federal government grants to the state of Minnesota, the state will actually collect over 77 stadiums of money. Here's how all that money gets spent. 35 stadiums on health and human services, 19 stadiums on K-12 education, 7 stadiums on transportation, more than 3 stadiums on property tax aid and credits, more than 3 stadiums on debt service, 3 stadiums on higher education, 2.5 stadiums on public safety, about 2 stadiums on economic development, less than 2 stadiums on state government and veterans, and less than 2 stadiums on environment and agriculture. 75 stadiums of spending over 2 years. That's what's in Minnesota's budget. To learn more about how Minnesota's government works, watch our series on the structure of Minnesota's government.